Chapter 1. Prologue. Contained within religions all over the world are tales of miraculous events, be they from the Abrahamic religions of the West or the Eastern religions of India and the Orient. There are accounts the world over of events that appear to defy the laws of nature. Even outside of religion, similar events are sometimes reported to occur and are chalked up to be paranormal. Whatever their origins, all of these accounts share one thing in common. They act upon the physical world in a manner that appears to transcend the laws of nature. As such, skeptics assert they are forbidden by science and are thus impossible.
A miracle is defined not as a part of the natural order, but as a suspension of the natural order.
No, an intervention.
If you meet someone in the street who you yesterday saw executed, you can say either that an extraordinary miracle has occurred or that you are under a very grave misapprehension. And David Hume's logic on this, I think, is quite irrefutable. He says, what is more likely, that the laws of nature have been suspended in your favor and in a way that you approve, or that you've made a mistake?
But is this really the case? Or are there more things on heaven and earth than are dreamt of in the materialistic philosophy of the skeptic?
I'd say things are different now.
Chapter 2. Signs and Wonders. When looked at carefully, the supposed impossibility of miracles arises more from a philosophical than a scientific disagreement. With the rise of dualism in the 17th century, a strict dichotomy arose between the natural material world and the mental, which was relegated to the supernatural. However, this produced two problems. Firstly, the supernatural was supposed to be off limits to the material sciences and inexplicable through human reason. This gave rise to the notion of the God of the Gaps, the idea that the supernatural was only ever needed to explain things that were currently unexplained by science. Secondly, how could the supernatural interact with the natural? If matter and mind were to interact, they would need to do so by some shared property. And if they shared a property, this dualism would collapse into monism. Thus, for dualism to work, the supernatural could never act upon the natural, and thus miracles would be forbidden. However, materialism versus dualism turns out to be a false dichotomy. A third option, idealism, is possible. Being monistic in nature, this avoids the interaction problem of dualism. Furthermore, on idealism, the distinction between natural and supernatural fades, thereby placing a hair-raising possibility on the table. Can we explain miracles with science? Chapter 3. SciFi Magic. To test this hypothesis, it may be useful to attempt to reverse engineer a miracle. When working on my science fiction novels, I attempted to do just that. My Alaris series was an attempt to merge science fiction and fantasy in a believable way. But for that, I needed a scientific facsimile of magic. I could have opted for Arthur C. Clarke's sufficiently advanced technology, but that seemed like a cop-out. Rather, I tried something else. Recent discoveries in quantum gravity show that the fabric of space-time emerges from quantum information lying outside of physical reality. Thus, the idea came to mind that one could use this to hack physical reality much in the way that one could use cheat codes in a computer game. Thus, the formula for my fake science fiction magic was simple. Information changing reality, which is also information. This, of course, looks like magic, with cheat codes substituted for spells. But could it plausibly be thought of as real magic? Chapter 4. Real Magic. Put yourself into a fantasy world for a moment. Say, a Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings universe where such a thing as real magic is possible. Of course, science would not exist in such a world, but philosophy could. Now let us use philosophy to examine this thing called magic. You see a spell, which once spoken somehow changes reality to produce a miraculous effect. What is going on here? A spell is of course words or information. However, for it to avoid an interaction problem between information and matter, the world of the fantasy story would also have to be information. Thus, real magic, of the kind used by Gandalf or Harry, would be by definition information changing reality, which is also information.
Before you cast a spell, you must learn the ancient language of the elves. Brisinga means fire. is fire. The thing is the word. Know the word, and you control the thing.
The word is the thing, and in digital physics, the bit is the it. Ironically, this is exactly the same idea as the science fiction magic described in the previous chapter, albeit recast in a scientific context. So is that magic real or fake? Or is the distinction blurred altogether? Chapter 5. Scientific Miracles. Given this formula, we now have a context to work from. A miracle would be a manipulation of physical reality at the level at which it is being generated from information. But how would we engineer such a miracle in reality? Firstly, an idealistic paradigm will be necessary to avoid any interaction problem that would prevent miracles. Thus, first and foremost, a scientific form of idealism would need to be derived. But simple idealism is not enough. Miracles are thought to be actions of the non-physical upon the physical. Thus, though dualism will need to go, our model will still need an additional non-physical realm beyond what is ordinarily seen as natural. However, seemingly paradoxically, this realm will still need to be governed by the laws of physics. Lastly, there will need to be some mechanism to interface this realm with the so-called natural realm within physical spacetime. Thus, we will need to use physics that interacts both in spacetime and outside of spacetime. With the problem now clearly defined, we are ready to set about engineering a miracle. But does the physics exist for everything on our checklist? Surprisingly, the answer is yes.
So wait, is sorcery science or magic?
Yes and yes.
Chapter 6. A Mental Universe. First on our list is a derivation of a scientific form of idealism. How is this possible, though? As pointed out before, quantum gravity tells us that physical spacetime is itself emergent from quantum information, precisely entangled information. Thus, upon close examination, we find out that so-called physical reality is nothing more than an information construct. In turn, information and consciousness are intricately related. Our subjective experience is merely a set of ideas or percepts integrated together in a single conscious state. Building on this insight, integrated information theory, or IIT, quantifies this conscious experience in terms of integrated information, or phi. Thus, all one needs to have consciousness is information integrated together in a single conscious state.
And if you want to build a conscious system, or you want to ask whether any system is conscious, well, that system should have a huge repertoire of possible states. So whenever any one of those states occurs, it rules out tons of other, and therefore is very informative. And number two, those states must be part of the repertoire of a single entity.
However, according to IIT, entangled information is necessarily integrated. Thus, saying that spacetime emerges from entangled information is the same thing as saying that spacetime emerges from a conscious state. The physical universe, then, is a giant mental simulation. A mental universe alone is not sufficient to create a miracle, however. We also need a non-physical realm behind it to act upon it. As it turns out, we are in luck here as well. Chapter 7. Fredkin's Other. A scientific model of idealism avoids the interaction problem that would otherwise prohibit miracles. But does it also explain them? For this, we need a supernatural, or more precisely, a supraphysical reality that can act upon the physical plane. A cause on the supraphysical plane can then cause an effect in physical spacetime. But is there any support for such a realm? Interestingly, our physics supports exactly such a notion. If physical spacetime is an emergent information construct, then logically it must emerge from somewhere outside of physical reality. Physicists believe that the universe emerges from a domain called Fredkin's Other. As digital physicist Ed Fredkin explains, our world is simulated within a larger realm outside of our physical reality.
The computer is somewhere else, someplace I call other, some other place. And the point is, if all of this is some kind of informational process running in some machine, the machine is not in this universe. It's somewhere else, and this universe is a consequence of its running.
But how do we model this realm? As pointed out before, the layer beneath spacetime is comprised of entanglements, which are defined in terms of shared wave functions. This leads physicists like Sean Carroll to note that space emerges from Hilbert space, the mathematical description of the more fundamental reality the quantum wave function exists in.
Whereas space is just obviously not fundamental. Space is something where when you go from classical mechanics to quantum mechanics, space more or less disappears. In classical mechanics, what do you have? Some particles moving through space with some velocity. In quantum mechanics, you have a wave function of all those particles. That wave function, we tend to talk a language that the wave function is a function of all the particles and their locations in space, but we don't have to talk that language. We can use what is called the momentum space description. We can completely describe the particles by how fast they're moving instead of where they are in the universe. And for that matter, we don't need to use any description at all. We can just use these quantum mechanical states in their own right, with no reference to space whatsoever.
But how does this help us manipulate physical reality? Chapter 8. As above, so below. Interestingly, a clue may arise from the new field of quantum cognition. Quantum cognition models our cognitive processes in terms of superpositions of wave functions. The fuzzy logic found in our choices, such as the ambivalence we have in choosing between chocolate and vanilla ice cream, or blue and gray when picking the color of our car, bears an exact mathematical relation to the state of superposition in the quantum wave function. Furthermore, due to the nature of quantum computation, such behavior cannot be simulated in classical systems without exponential slowdown. Each quantum superposition would need to be unpacked into numerous classical states, generating impossibly unwieldy classical computations. Meaning, if our minds behave quantum, then they must in fact be quantum.
Now, quantum cognition says quantum mathematics is more applicable to what the brain does than classical Bayesian. The psychological conflict, ambiguity, and uncertainty can be viewed as quantum superposition of multiple possible judgments and beliefs. The brain has quantum biology, it has to. And for example, if a classical system would try to simulate a quantum system, you'd have exponential slowdown, as Feynman showed.
If true, our inner space of thoughts and emotions are comprised of fields of wave functions, which interface with our brain. This being the case, we can equate our inner space as existing in the more fundamental reality mathematically described as Hilbert space. This of course makes intuitive sense, as we cannot locate our thoughts and emotions in physical space. Yet they obviously exist. If our space-time then emerges from Hilbert space, it follows that space emerges from a larger shared inner space.
The very fabric of space and time is composed of more fundamental spaceless and timeless entities. Those spaceless and timeless entities that they're looking for are in fact conscious agents, and the stable dynamics of those conscious agents actually leads to the bits of Minkowski space we need to piece together to get the unified theory we're looking for.
If this is true, however, it has a curious effect. It means that mental influences existing above spacetime in the Hilbert space, described by quantum cognition, can in principle induce effects below it in our physical realm. We now have, at least in theory, means by which the physical realm can be influenced by a non-physical realm in Fredkin's other. And it may just be that this effect is more than theoretical.
A question tonight, can you actually measure the emotional outpouring in a worldwide crisis?
Sometimes scientists think that they have done just that. Their machines and computers found a bizarre pattern right after several global disasters.
CBS 2's Brendan Keefe explains this phenomenon.
If you flip a coin 100 times, you'd expect a result of about 50-50. 50 heads and 50 tails. But what if every time you flipped that coin, it came up heads? Not once, not twice, not 50 times, but 60, 70, or even 80, all of them heads. Back and forth around 50-50 in a pattern the researchers call a drunkard's walk.
And then in 9/11, it begins not being a drunkard's walk. It goes like this for 2 days.
It may sound bizarre, but Dr. Nelson and his team have been at this for the better part of a decade. The first spike showed up in 1997 with the death of Princess Diana. Other events like the Concorde crash, the Madrid train bombing, and the Pope's funeral all registered on those random number generators. But early on the morning of September 11th, the data went off the charts.
Though such research is not without its critics, the Global Consciousness Project has broken 7 sigma in its test results. By contrast, the cutoff for scientific proof is only 5 sigma, neatly tossing the critics into the dustbin of pseudo-skeptical irrelevancy. But how do we control such an effect? To properly replicate a miracle, we will need some way to manipulate the contents of Hilbert space on command from within our physical spacetime. Is this possible? If so, what mechanism might bridge this gap? Chapter 9. Waves of Vibration. If we take quantum cognition seriously, as must be the case if we are to explain how it is that our thoughts and emotions cannot be located in physical space, then a convenient answer presents itself. Quantum cognition treats our inner state as behaving as quantum probability waves. If the Hilbert space in which these quantum probabilities exist is really beneath spacetime, then it extends into the superphysical realm. However, when projected into spacetime, these same quantum probabilities take on the form of sine waves, with time dependencies, extended in space and time. Thus, quantum probability waves, or as Professor Michio Kaku likes to call them,
waves of vibration,
are a mechanism that interfaces the superphysical mental realm behind spacetime and the quantum computed virtual reality we call physical within it. In turn, these waves of vibration generate the contents of our physical reality, from the microcosm of subatomic particles to the macrocosm of entire spacetime manifolds. And this applies to everything at all. In 2007, it was even found that spacetime itself can be described as a string net liquid, a state of large-scale entanglements linking everything within as a giant interference pattern of quantum waves. Matter and the vacuum state, therefore, are really only the same thing at different states of vibration.
A deep idea emerging from string theory is that matter and space are two descriptions of the same thing. We can study a complicated collection of stringy matter and note its vibration frequencies. But by Einstein's theory of general relativity, matter stretches spacetime, and we can look at the vibrations of this extra space created by the matter. We get the same frequencies, showing that we can replace a description of matter by a description of space.
And if quantum cognition is to be taken literally, then each of these states also corresponds to a unique mental state outside of spacetime. Shift the vibration in one direction or the other, and the mental state changes slightly.
Whereas the one that has a slightly different thing, which presumably is the same receptor, smells like raspberries. So how can this be? They're locking in the same receptors. So the theory is that even if the shape of the molecule is the same, so it locks in the same receptors, because it's got this slight difference, where this is a few pieces heavier, this deuterium is twice as heavy as what the hydrogen, it vibrates with different fashion. So the hydrogen bond is vibrating like this. The deuterium bond is vibrating like this. And this kind of wave-like nature is a peculiarly quantum kind of fact. And somehow this receptor is able to sense this vibrational difference by absorbing a single quantum sound, vibrational quantum. You could think of it as like the quantum of smell.
Likewise, change the mental state, and the vibration changes. Chapter 10. Hacking the Matrix. We now have all of our tools: an idealist physics, a hidden superphysical plane from which to manipulate physical reality, and an interface mechanism between the physical and the non-physical. But how do we use this to manipulate reality and replicate a full-on bona fide miracle? How do we hack the Matrix and develop superpowers? As we learned before, the universe is generated by quantum computations in Fredkin's other. Quantum computations, which according to a literal understanding of quantum cognition, are encoded in non-local mental states outside of spacetime. In turn, these non-local states are seen from within spacetime as manifesting as quantum probability waves, ultimately forming a giant holographic interference pattern. Thus, to create a miracle, a simple solution presents itself. Raise or lower the frequencies of vibration of the quantum probability waves in the interference pattern, and you can reprogram the underlying quantum probabilities in the superphysical realm generating the world. Then, just like magic, upon collapse, these reprogrammed quantum waves cause brand new physical states to manifest, producing what people commonly think of as miracles.
So wait, is sorcery science or magic?
Yes and yes. For now, all you need is a basic combat spell, making fire. What causes molecules to heat up?
They vibrate?
Everything we see is in a constant state of vibration, thus the illusion of solidity. But how do we take that which appears solid and have it burst into flames? We will the vibrations to go faster. Step 1, clear your mind. Step 2, see the molecules. Step 3, make them shake.
Given that all of reality is generated in this way, we could use this in principle to do anything at all, be it generating bolts of plasma, changing water into wine, shifting the vibrations of the myosin molecules in the throats of smug atheists.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Or even reprogramming the underlying probability waves of dead bodies such that they come back to life.
Scientific team regarding the shroud image. The actual image was created by a phenomenon as yet unknown, or a momentous event that caused a rapid cellulose degradation, aging, of the linen fibers. That is, an accelerated dehydration and oxidation of the very top linen fibrils of the cellulose fibers of the shroud, thereby creating a sepia or straw yellow colored image similar to that of a scorch. In other words, the image was caused by something, nobody knows what, that affected only the very top of the fibrils that make up the fibers that in turn make up the fabric.
After thousands of hours of intense study, the world was left with yet another scientific enigma. A piece of fabric that is demonstrably hand-woven containing a surface anomaly in the shape and form of a crucified man, created by some process of undetermined origin.
But how could an image containing so much information have been formed? There are those who believe the image could only have been formed by a burst of some sort of radiation. But the simple fact is, nothing like the shroud image has ever been found or reproduced. But that's only the beginning of the astounding information to be gleaned from this amazing image. In spite of skeptics and setbacks, scientists continue their search. And Dame Isabel Pitzik, a particle physicist, believes the shroud has brought science to the threshold of a whole new understanding of physics. While dealing with the position of the body within the cloth, she discovered one of those mysterious properties that cannot be, yet somehow is. An interface that divides the image transport into two hermetically separate yet simultaneous actions and forces, causing the shroud to be taut and parallel on both sides.
When you look at the image of the shroud, the two bodies next to each other, you feel that it's a flat image. But if you create, for instance, a three-dimensional object, as I did, the real body, then you realize that there is a strange dividing element, an interface, from which the image is projected up and the image is projected down. The muscles of the body are absolutely not crushed against the stone of the tomb. They are perfect. It means that the body is hovering between the two sides of the shroud. What does that mean? That there is absolutely no gravity. Other strange things you discover that the image is absolutely undistorted. Now, if you imagine that the cloth was wrinkled, tied, wrapped around the body, and all of a sudden you see a perfect image, which is impossible unless the shroud was made absolutely taut, rigidly taut.
Chapter 11. Epilogue. Despite the protestations of ignorant materialists, it becomes apparent that miracles are not at all impossible. In fact, as it appears, not only are they not impossible, but they are not even beyond scientific comprehension. The apparent dichotomy between miracles and scientific possibility is ultimately seen to stem from a deeper dualistic dichotomy between a physical scientific realm and a supernatural realm beyond human ken. Idealistic ontology exposes this as a false dichotomy, however, opening up what is commonly seen as the supernatural to be conquered by science, and placing miracles fully within the realm of scientific possibility.
If the simulation hypothesis is valid, then we open the door to eternal life and resurrection and things that formerly have been discussed in the realm of religion. And so it starts to break down a very funny barrier between what people often think is the conflict between science and the conflict between faith.
Lastly, however, there is another small issue I must address. Rumor has it that I accidentally stumbled upon something esoteric or enigmatic or occult or otherwise arcane, and that I then reverse engineered it with modern physics. I assure you, however, that such rumors are of course false and ridiculous. As everyone knows, real magic does not exist. However, if I did it, I would likely also have been contacted by members of what can best be euphemistically referred to as private fraternal clubs. Since everybody knows that such things also do not exist, though, I obviously could not have done it. I would also have likely been privy to witnessing certain phenomena that defy materialistic explanation, and maybe even seen things in Fredkin's Other, if I did it.
Oh, you find what you're looking for, Mr. Lovecraft?
You might say it found me.
However, as everybody knows, these things are impossible and can't possibly exist. Thus, I couldn't possibly have done it, so I assure you that these rumors are of course nothing more than ridiculous conspiracy theories. That being said, have a good day. The miracle physics seen in this video was developed for my Alaris science fiction series, the second installment of which, Alaris, the Pearl of Heaven, has now officially been released on Amazon Kindle, as shown in the description.
Mr. Lovecraft. Actually, I'm here because a new story of mine demands a bit of fact-checking.
Fact-checking? We were under the impression you dealt in fiction.
My work is wrongly construed as fiction by the lesser-minded. In fact, I take great pride in presenting fictional possibilities. It's my duty, after all, as a human being, to enlighten the darkest depths of experience, to expose certain secrets unjustly hoarded by others.
We shall see.
If you like this video, subscribe and support me on Patreon. And don't forget to check out the books in my Alaris novel series, Alaris, The Lances of Light, and Alaris, The Pearl of Heaven, on Amazon Kindle in the description below. You can find us on Facebook as well, at Idealism and Science versus Atheism.